So I'd like to introduce briefly Mark Brewer, who's former chair at Michigan Democratic Party, Barb Byrum, Ingham County Clerk, Ed Golembiewski, who we know here in Washtenaw County as the Director of Elections, Mary Hall-Thiam, who is the Vice Chair of the Washtenaw County Board of Canvassers, Larry Kestenbaum, Washtenaw County Clerk, whom we also know, and Doug Scott, who was the former chair of the Washtenaw County Board of Canvassers. What I propose is to give each member of the panel 10 minutes. So we have about an hour and a half left in the meeting. You don't have to take all 10 minutes, but up to 10 minutes, and then open the floor to questions. And I'm going, since I can't figure out a better way to do this, I'm going to take it in alphabetical order by last name. So Mark Brewer, let's see if he's here.
Great, thanks, Eli. It's great to be with everybody this morning. Really appreciate the invitation. If I want to leave you with one message this morning, it's that democracy in Michigan and nationally is going to continue to be under attack through at least 2024. So we need to be vigilant. This was not over after we got through 2020. It's going to continue to at least 2024. And I want to give you some examples of these attacks that we're seeing in Michigan and nationally, and then be glad to participate in the rest of the panel. We're going to see continued efforts to limit ballot access in this state. So far, Governor Whitmer has been able to veto everything that's come across her desk. But we're going to see, and we're seeing already, voter suppression through ballot proposals, the so-called secure MI vote proposal, which we're urging people not to sign. But even if we defeat that one, either because they get insufficient signatures or we challenge the signatures, I'm confident there are going to be more voter proposals like that in the next couple of years. If the Republicans win either the governorship, the attorney general, or the secretary of state's races this year, then we use those offices to engage in voter suppression. They will reverse what Benson has done in a wide variety of areas to enhance the right to vote in this state. So it's critically important that we reelect those three office holders to office. We are going to see continued attacks and efforts to undermine the state and local boards of canvassers. We've seen a systematic effort around the state to appoint these big lie believers to the boards of canvassers in the hopes that they will refuse to certify elections in the future, as nearly happened in Wayne County in 2020. And that will create enormous number of problems, not only in Michigan, but nationally. So we're going to have to be vigilant about that. And just the mere fact that those people are on those boards erodes confidence in the democratic process. We're going to see continued efforts for so-called audits at the state and local level. In my home county of Macomb, there's an ongoing effort to pressure the clerk and the county board to engage in one of these so-called forensic audits. Those are not going to stop. And on election day and in the run-up to election day, we're going to continue to see very aggressive voter suppression tactics, intimidation at polling places, litigation. There's litigation now, for example, pending that would block the ability of local jurisdictions to accept charitable funding to help administer elections. We're going to see continued Republican efforts in that regard as well. So I want to come back to where I started. The promote the vote proposal that Kim described will help block many of these things that I've just described, but it will not block them all. We're going to have to continue to be vigilant to make sure we get good people on boards of canvassers, that we recruit election inspectors. We're going to make sure that people have the right to vote. And we're going to have to be prepared through court action and otherwise to protect the right to vote for at least 2 more years through the 2024 presidential election. With that, I'll wrap up. Nathan, I'll be glad to answer questions once the rest of the panel has a chance to talk.
Thank you very much, Mark. Next up is Barb Byrum. Barb, if you would unmute.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you this morning. I am currently coming from you to you from East Grand Rapids, where my offspring are currently participating in a swim meet. So I apologize for the background and perhaps running children down the hallway. I'm hidden in the hallway right now at a school. So I must admit, Brewer's a tough act to follow. So I'm not sure how much more I can add, but I do want to make sure you are all aware of the legislative Republicans and how they have been attempting to limit ballot access, whether that's absentee ballots or in-person ballot access through introduced legislation and, of course, promoting the election conspiracies. You know, I personally testified in the Michigan legislature to educate lawmakers on how elections are run. Spoiler alert, they're safe, they're secure, and they're accessible. And to ask the legislators to pass legislation that would actually help local, city and township, and county clerks better run elections. Instead, they spent their time introducing bills that perpetrated the big lie and engaged in political theater. If you'll remember the burning of absentee ballot applications, the sham hearing with Rudy Giuliani, and don't even get me started on Melissa Carone. Instead of doing what would make election administrators' jobs easier. Some examples, they provide prepaid postage on absentee ballot envelopes, or even sending absentee ballot applications to every voter before each election, or continuing to have the absentee ballot application available on the Secretary of State's website. There's actually legislation that will prohibit clerks and the Secretary of State from having that application on their website. Thankfully, we have Governor Whitmer, who has been vetoing all of these bad election bills. Republicans are working to disrupt the process and intimidate voters. There have been reports of people knocking on doors and asking voters if they voted in the November 2020 election and how they voted. I believe the best way we can combat this is by talking to our families and friends and letting them know to shut the door in these individuals' faces. This is not to be confused with knocking on doors and knocking on doors and encouraging people to vote for the candidate. This is knocking on doors and specifically asking voters how they voted, if they voted, and getting more information from them. And in the guise of making sure the election was accurate. We know the election was accurate. We have canvassed and certified and audited and risk limited audited. And even in some cases, the Auditor General audited the November 2020 election, and the results did not change. The victorious candidates they won, and I miss the days of the losing candidate conceding and moving on, whether it's to develop better policies, ideas, or for other candidates, perhaps better candidates, to run. We need you engaged in elections. The other side is engaging. They're signing up to be poll watchers, challengers, and even precinct inspectors. We need reasonable people to also serve these roles. Learn how our elections work so that you may push back against the election conspiracies. And if I leave you with nothing, please know that in election administration, forensic audits do not exist. That is not a real thing. So if you hear about it, please call it out. Definitely call that out. In Michigan, we have numerous processes to ensure honest and accurate tabulation and transmission of votes. There were some human errors in the November 2020 election that were quickly caught and corrected. And I mentioned this before, but I really want to slow it down and mention this again. At this point, the records and results of the Michigan November 2020 election had been tabulated, canvassed, and certified by the County Board of Canvassers, canvassed and certified by the State Board of Canvassers, audited, risk limited audited, which was a statewide pilot audit, and at least in one of my precincts, audited by the State Office of Auditor General. Each time these results were verified, the documentation was in order, and the results remained the same. One of my biggest concerns is that I'm noticing that clerks and election administrators are leaving the job because of bullying, high stress, and pressure. Please continue to be vigilant. And if you suspect that your local clerk is not following the law or disenfranchising voters or tampering with election equipment, contact the Bureau of Elections with the Secretary of State's office or your county clerk, especially in Washtenaw. There are extreme measures that can be taken to take control of the elections if things get out of hand. I'm specifically pointing to Adams Township and Hillsdale County. Again, thank you so much for fighting back regarding these election conspiracies, misinformation, disinformation, and these horrific petitions that we're seeing, like Secure Michigan Vote petition drive. If I may ever be of assistance to you, please feel free to contact me on Twitter at Barb Byrum or via email at clerkbyrum@gmail.com. Again, thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity to speak to you this morning.
Thank you so much, Barb. I hope your children do well in the swim meet. Ed Golembiewski,
Thank you.
you're up next.
Thank you very much. If Mark was a tough act, Barb is obviously even a tougher act to follow. I'll do my best. I'm Ed Golembiewski. I know many of you, certainly not all of you. I have 10 years experience serving as the Director of Elections here in Washtenaw County. I also have experience administering elections at the city and township levels here in Michigan, and specifically in Washtenaw County. I want to point your attention today. Well, first, I want to acknowledge that the folks from Promote the Vote and the discussion around that initiative, I think it's a very positive one. I think that it's a proposal that I would support. I do support as a professional election administrator. I don't think that it's perfect. I think that it goes a great deal towards closing out. It does not close all of them, but it does move us in the right direction. But I want to point everyone's attention today to actions that we need to take right now this year. Promote the Vote 2 or 2022 is going to help us down the road, but it doesn't help us this year. And just this week, I want to remind everybody that the Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks and Michigan Association of County Clerks published an open letter, a bipartisan group of clerks, I should add, calling for immediate action from the legislature to address urgent matters that we have before us right now. Those items specifically, and most importantly, are funding. As Clerk Byrum pointed out, we are living in a world right now that has been made much more complicated for election administrators in many ways, from outside pressure that they're receiving, but also just by nature of the fact that voters are choosing to vote in different ways than they used to in the past. City and township clerks need resources right now to be able to adequately process absentee ballots, which voters are using in increasingly large numbers, and the ability to pre-process those absentee ballots ahead of Election Day. This was a critical issue before election administrators in 2020, when unprecedented numbers of absentee ballots were cast. Clerks need additional time to be able to process that large volume of absentee ballots. There's also an urgent need to enshrine early voting, as well as a few other items like, for instance, ensuring that challengers that we know were so well mobilized in the 2020 general election have adequate training and understand what their roles and responsibilities really are and what they are not, and providing additional access to view post-election audits, which we've been doing for a long time here in the state of Michigan, both performance audits to ensure that all of the necessary steps have been taken by city and township clerks to administer an election with integrity, as well as risk limiting audits that have been introduced here in the state of Michigan that sample ballots that have been cast to ensure that the results from them accurately match the certified results that were reported. We also need to take a look at moving the primary in the state of Michigan from August to an earlier date. There have been a few options proposed. Basically, any date sooner than August would help election administrators be able to work through recounts and legal challenges that inevitably crop up after that election. Right now, we are dealing with a very limited amount of time to move from the primary to deliver a ballot for the November general election, and any additional time that we can get would be beneficial there. And lastly, I just want to point out that, again, these are things that we can do right now. I do call on you to be vocal about these issues, urge legislatures to move on these items now, and also please engage us as poll workers this year. We have at the county at Washtenaw County, we've got a form ready for you. If you visit washtenaw.org/pollworker, you can register your interest in serving. We will connect you with a city or a township clerk. And if, as we found in 2020, if we find that we fill the ranks quickly, there are certainly other opportunities as well. I know that there'll be issues and urgency to utilize poll watchers this year. That's definitely an option. But right now, clerks are looking for new poll workers to supplant the ranks of folks that have had to move on for some reason, and there's always a need for additional poll workers. So with that, I'll close my my timeout. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Mary Hall-Thiam.
Good morning, everybody. And you've heard all of the, let's say, important things that we need to do. As vice chair on the board of canvassers for Washtenaw County, I think the one thing that I would really like to emphasize is that we continue to be vigilant as to who we put on our board of canvassers, our local elected officials or appointed officials. This is an appointed position, and all of the things that have come before in terms of the process, I sometimes look at it as a Lego process, that anytime, or dominoes, you take one link out, the whole chain could fall. So being transparent, being vigilant, and working at the local level is what we need to do. During the 2020 elections was the first time I have experienced having an audience come and look at our work. We have an excellent set of processes. We have wonderful people as our director of elections and our county clerk. But this is a part of civics. And if you're interested, come and look at what we do. The other part that I'd like to say about the Board of Canvassers is, one, it's only consists of 4 people, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. The work is intensive in terms of the processes that we follow to make sure that the ballots are secure, that everything is counted, and that we document all of the processes that we go through. And they are extensive. So become a part of Civics 101, go back to school, come and see what we do. This information is posted on the website. It is readily available, and we welcome your visits to our activities. And I won't take up any more time of my 10 minutes and turn it over to the next person. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. The next is Larry Kestenbaum. Larry.
Hi, I'm, as most of you know, I'm the Washtenaw County Clerk, Register of Deeds. Have been since I was first elected in '04, ousting my Republican predecessor, and I was the first Democrat to be county clerk in this county in 7 decades. This used to be a very Republican county. I want to echo a little bit of what Ed has already said in terms of the organizations. The Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks and the Michigan Association of County Clerks together have issued an open letter. I put it on my Facebook page. You can see it other places as well. An open letter basically calling on the legislature to make a number of changes as soon as possible for the 2022 cycle to be able to, so that we can facilitate having an election, having a clear, straightforward, and an accurate election that's open to everyone. And I understand that, notwithstanding the fact that, we talk about clerks, in Michigan, we have 83 counties that are all roughly the same size geographically and radically different in size in population terms, so that you have a lot of rural counties So the majority of county clerks are Republican, but for some reason, Republicans in the legislature have rejected the advice of their own clerks. Back when same-sex marriage became a reality in the Supreme Court, first here in Michigan for a brief time, and then ultimately nationally, and people asked me, how many aren't clerks going to resist this? Are they going to refuse to issue same-sex marriage licenses? And there's 3,000 counties in the United States, and only one county, and only Rowan County, Kentucky, that was the only one where the county clerk refused to issue same-sex marriage licenses. Clerks follow the law. They are lawful good in orientation, if you're familiar with the D&D or orientation. So the proposals that we put forward in that letter, that open letter to the legislature and the governor, I'm hopeful that people will take that seriously. It is unfortunate when the legislature and the governor have gotten bogged down in some of the conflicts over things that could easily have been avoided if, again, relatively non-controversial in theory, but yet the legislature has trouble enacting any of these things. And one of the most important, and Ed mentioned this, is that the primary in Michigan is way too late. Okay, an August primary is almost unsustainable given 14 days to certify it. After that, recounts and other kinds of challenges and so forth. And then you quickly run into the state and federal legal requirements of having ballots available for overseas absentees 45 days before the election. So almost all the other states have moved their primaries earlier, many of them to early May, like Indiana and Ohio, for example, and we could do the same. For some reason, there's been some resistance to moving the election to May instead, and you're talking about, well, maybe in June or something. Like I said, anything earlier than August would be an improvement. I think in the part of the resistance to May, it comes from Republicans who don't want to see college students vote, and that is again unfortunately the reality that in May people are around, you'll have a good turnout. In June it's a lot harder. August it's impossible. So but anyway, that's one thing that needs to happen. Another thing that we have. Again, as part of this letter, is that absentee ballots are more costly and labor intensive to process, which is, it's fine. We want the absentee ballots, but the funding for clerks, for local clerks, for county clerks needs to keep up with that reality. And in a lot of places, it hasn't. Now, one of the things about absentee ballots is that people have been finding people across the state, in every part of the state, the proportion of people voting absentee has been going up little by little for many years. And then in 2018, we got no reason absentee finally, okay, and just about literally every clerk in the state supported no reason absentee, notwithstanding the legislature refusing to pass it. Finally, it was passed by the Promote the Vote initiative. And then we have the pandemic, and we have a tremendous increase in the number of absentee ballots, which again required a lot more processing, a lot more election workers to be on absentee ballot counting boards. And in the 2020 election, there was actually, because of Democrats taking advantage of voting absentee and Republicans scorning it, there was a 30-point partisan difference between people voting in person and people voting absentee. That absentee ballots were 30 points more Democratic, at least in this county, and I think that was typical of the state. And that turned out to be a great advantage for Democrats, because people who vote absentee have the opportunity to look things up and to decide what, to be able to cast more informed votes. And that's why Michigan Democrats won the Supreme Court last time, because Democrats were able to know, okay, these are because the Supreme Court candidates are listed on the ballot without their party designations, but they're nominated by political parties. And the So as a result, people will go there, they'll see incumbents, they'll see Irish names, they'll see women, and they may not vote for the Democrat, notwithstanding that we put out door hangers and flyers and so forth, vote for the Democrats for the Supreme Court, and then we find again and again, even Democratic precincts wouldn't support them, wouldn't vote for them. In 2020, with people voting absentee, Democrats knew to vote for the Democrat. Many of the Republicans did, because they were voting in person. They did not. So it was thank God for that. I'm very grateful that happened. We had until relatively recently, we had the worst and most partisan state Supreme Court in the nation, and that's no longer the case, in part because of absentee ballots. There was a lot of questions about the canvassing process, and they say that the canvassers are appointed. Basically each party chair nominates 3 people, and the county clerk and the county board of commissioners choose which of the 3 for each position. There are always 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. They are bipartisan commissions. In 2020, we had the board of canvassers in this county on its own motion issued a letter signed by all 4, basically congratulating all the election officials and clerks and election workers. We had 1,500 election workers and poll workers in this county in 2020, in 150 precincts plus counting boards. And they issued a letter saying, congratulating all of us for having such great, smooth, clean, problem-free election. So one of the things that we are very happy to see in terms of the redistricting is that Washtenaw County, for the first time in half a century, Washtenaw County is now all in one congressional district, and that means that instead of the board of canvassers members being nominated by congressional district parties, the party chairs may be outside the county and may have other agendas. That from now on, at least for the next 10 years, those individuals will be nominated by the county chairs in the county, the Republican and Democratic county chairs. And for example, we had a perfectly good Republican canvasser ousted, and there was some notion that this was a Trumpian thing, that he was going to be replaced by someone who was going to refuse to certify elections. I don't think that that's the case. We don't know yet, but we're not. So far, the new canvasser seems to be cooperating and working with us in a positive way. But that wouldn't have happened if it was the people within the county chairs making those nominations. The petition process, this is it is. I think I mentioned it's really frustrating to me that there's now 2 different petitions going around for in terms of election reform. Let me point out something, and that is that we have the number of signatures required to put something on ballot is based on the number of votes for governor. And in 2018, the last time we had an election for governor, we had by far the largest turnout ever in Michigan, a 1/3 higher than ever before. That means the number of signatures required is a 1/3 higher than it ever was before. So getting the number of signatures that are required is a higher hill to climb, plus the pandemic and plus all the confusion over don't sign this one, and et cetera, secure my vote being out there. My sense is that everybody who's trying to get something in the ballot is struggling because of all of those issues and because of the much higher signature requirement that we now have. And I understand that there's a number of different responses to the Republican proposal, which would be, in many ways, catastrophic for elections. It would make Michigan into a hard ID state, where basically if you don't have the accepted kind of ID, you're not allowed to vote, like Texas. But it would also require basically that all of these polling places in churches and so forth, that they would be required to charge the full value of permitting their polling place, they wouldn't be allowed to do it for free because that would be a donation to the election process, an outside funding situation. And so we would be either losing these places, or we basically, the funding is not going to be available for, again, there's 1,500 townships. There's all of these places that have very limited funding for elections, and that would endanger that. There are basically the secure my vote is not going to be before the voters at all. There's no intention for it to be. What they're doing is they gather the signatures, they turn it over to the legislature passes it, the governor doesn't get a veto, and it's in law, just like that. There is a process that within 90 days, you can come up with the signatures to oppose it. It's, again, given all the things I mentioned, that's not going to be happening. Plus the time frame is going to be ridiculous. So what's happening is that there are two different proposals that are designed to counter the Secure My Vote proposal, assuming that they're going to get the signatures. It's going to be passed by the legislature over Democrats' objections. And one of them, and I think the most important one, is to close this loophole, okay? To basically take out of the Constitution this notion that once you gather the signatures, the legislature can just pass it without having to go to the governor or the people. And I think that's and this is not just about election law. This is about labor law. This is about social services. This is about every aspect of Michigan law where the Republicans can go out there, get their signatures, put it to the legislature and pass it and never have to face a vote of the people. And they've tried this again and again, and sometimes they've succeeded and sometimes they failed. But the point is they shouldn't have that opportunity. No one should. Then there's also the two proposals, the one of them which has been talked about already, and then there's the Michigan right to vote, which unfortunately they don't seem to have a website up or anything like that. So I'm not sure what their situation is. The Michigan right to vote counters every piece of the Republican proposal. The promote the vote one does not. It goes farther in some areas and less in others. I mean, there's a bunch of criticisms of it, but I will. I don't have the detailed critique right here to give you, but anyway, I do also want to really stress what Mark and Mark Brewer and Barb Byrum have said about we need poll workers, we need hopefully canvassers, although that's a relatively limited number. The thing about poll workers is that it used to be the only place you could be a poll worker was in your own city or township. Then that was broadened to anywhere in the county. Now it's statewide. So if you have the ability to be a poll worker in, let's say, in Detroit or in Livingston County or anywhere else, I would strongly encourage you to do so. In some of those places, basically, poll workers have to be partisan because every sensitive task being done by poll workers has to be done by two poll workers of different parties working together. Anything handling ballots and that kind of thing. The place where we really need to have more Democratic poll workers is out in the rural counties. And if you're able to do that, to go out to Jackson or Hillsdale or someplace like that and be a poll worker for the day, and get paid for it, I would strongly encourage you to do that. We oftentimes, when you get down to the election, people are coming to us saying, "Can I be a poll worker?" And we're saying, "We've got plenty of Democrats. Ann Arbor's got tons of Democrats. Go talk to Lenawee County or something like that." And then there's Detroit, where they have a chronic shortage of poll workers, all told. And so those are. And poll workers are paid, they're not paid a token amount anymore. They're paid, $12, $15 an hour for the time that they're spent there and the time for training. I see a comment saying that Republicans are recruiting poll workers too. That's good. We need to have Republican poll workers because there ought to be a Republican and a Democratic, poll workers in every precinct to keep more eyes on the process. And one of the other things about our audits and certification is that after a federal election, the ballots are kept, are required to be kept and preserved for almost 2 years. So there's the opportunity if someone wanted to go and do their own recount, as happened after the Florida situation in 2020, I mean in 2000, that those ballots are available, and in some places ballot images would be even available, so that and I don't sense that there's a lot of interest out there in doing that when they talk about forensic audits and so forth. Well, the ballots are right here. You can go look at them, and it's they're stored in 1,500 cities and townships, but they're there. And the 2016 recount, and I frequently come back to this. We had a partial, about half of a 2016 recount for the presidential race, and in which more than 2 million ballots were hand counted, and the numbers from that and compared to the reported numbers were right on. I'm seeing some questions in the chat, and let me see if I can address a couple of those. The work for poll workers, basically earlier than 7 a.m. to oftentimes as late as 10 p.m. There are very few places that offer shifts for poll workers. It's pretty much you're there all day. There's a question about if both of these election reform proposals pass, which one would there be? What happens if they're in conflict? What would happen is that both of them would go into the Constitution, but when there's a question of interpreting this provision versus that provision, the one that got more votes would prevail. It wouldn't wipe out any provisions. They would all go in there, as I understand it. But if one of them says, you can do this in 30 days, and the other one says you can do this in 60 days, the proposal that got more votes, more yes votes, would be the one that the courts would say, no, the 60 votes controls in this case, or the 30, whatever the 60 days, depending on which proposal got more votes. I hope that we don't run into that issue. Again, it's very hard to get signatures at all, let alone getting them for 2 or 3 different proposals that are all good. And I am really hoping that we get the one to abolish this crazy thing, this Michigan folkway of letting the legislature pass ballot proposals without going to the people or the governor. I think that needs to be done, and that's a very simple and straightforward thing, which we should all sign and pass and so forth. Another aspect of petition, just before I go, is that another Michigan folkway that is very well established, unfortunately, is that if you sign a petition twice by accident, which many people do because you don't remember which petition you signed, especially when you've got similar ones. If you sign a petition twice, your signature doesn't count at all. And so that's why every ballot proposal, every group promoting a ballot proposal, one of the things one of the necessary steps is to go through and to try to find all the duplicate signatures among their petitions and strike them out so as to prevent that from happening. And that's a labor-intensive and expensive and time-consuming process that only eats into the time you need to meet deadlines and so forth. But that is one of those peculiar things about Michigan that we have. That is another one is the unrecountability of precincts, which I thought after the 2016 recount that we would basically say it's time to re-examine this concept. 49 other states get by without this. Why should Michigan have this arbitrary rule? But unfortunately, the legislature has not had any interest in fixing that. And like many things, but I'm hopeful that next year we'll have a Democratic legislature and lots of good things can happen. But I'm not holding my breath. So I will thank you for listening, and I will. If you have further questions for me, My email is kestenbaum@gmail.com, just my last name at Gmail, and feel free to get in touch with me, and I will deal with them as best I can. And so, or call me, stop by my office. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much for that tutorial. That was fascinating. I took lots of notes. There will be a chance for questions for the whole panel after the next speaker, who is Doug Scott, Treasurer of the WCDP and formerly the Chair of the Washtenaw County Board of Canvassers. Doug?
Thanks, Eli. And being the last speaker, of course, Mary, Ed, and Larry have stolen a lot of what I was about to say. But I actually served 2 terms on the Board of Canvassers, and I like to call them by different periods. The first term that I served on, I like to call the BLK period, and the second term, the DLK period. The BLK period is before Larry Kestenbaum. The DLK period is during Larry Kestenbaum. I served in the BLK period controlled by Republicans during the 1990s as a rookie member with Barb Fuller, so I can report on 2 periods of service, and of course served more recently in the DLK period during Larry Kestenbaum, including as chair of the 2020 election. And as an aside, I just thought I'd mention that 3 of us on the panel, Mary, Barb, and myself, were included in a 2020 election lawsuit, at least momentarily, that sought to throw out the election results of Washtenaw, Oakland, Wayne, and Ingham counties. Now, I thought that I had a chance to achieve my 15 minutes of fame during that election lawsuit. But sadly, it wasn't Rudy Giuliani or Sidney Powell. It was their B team in the region that brought that lawsuit, and that lawsuit fizzled. So my 15 minutes of fame went out the door. Several members, Larry, Mary, and Ed, have explained what a Board of Canvassers member does during an entire election and the follow-up audit process. And basically, from my first term to my second term, the core of what a Board of Canvasser member does actually hasn't changed. But let me tell you that in the DLK period during Larry Kestenbaum, there has been vast streamlining. And I can report that the current election staff under Ed and Trish Riley works twice as hard as I've seen in the previous period. And as has been mentioned, we know that voting behavior has changed in the 2020 election, prompted, of course, by the formal 2018 voter-approved election laws, and of course, the less formal pandemic. And we've seen some of those changes, and again, Ed and Larry have reported them, particularly around absentee and mail-in voting, which has shifted the magnitude of voting prior to the actual voting day away from the in-precinct polling. And of course, that has vastly expanded the clerk's work in that pre-election period. But the Board of Canvassers' role, very simply put, is to make sure that those who are registered and those who vote are exactly in sync. And from what I've observed during my 2 terms, the clerks in Washtenaw County, and I further believe clerks and board members and Board of Canvass members throughout Michigan, do an excellent job in coordinating and validating elections. Now, this morning, you've heard discussions about what I prefer to call protecting election fairness. And we've heard it from many angles. We've heard it from issues of our Constitution, legality, legislative overreach, ballot measures that can both enhance and destroy election fairness. And we haven't really discussed the issues of cybersecurity around election security. What I would like to emphasize as my part today is really education and messaging, things that Democrats really don't do well. I don't like the term election integrity, but because Republicans, in my view, have corrupted its implied meaning. They say its meaning is to eliminate fraud that occurs in every election. And we see that presumed fraud immediately fosters distrust in all elements of elections. But elections are people, and distrust is spread to Secretary of States, county clerks and their staffs, election volunteers, poll workers, and members of boards of canvassers. And we know that distrust has generated issues of safety for those very same people. So we have to confront and deal with distrust. We should have learned by now that distrust in elections is easily motivated. If you say it enough, especially in social media and media outlets like Fox News, and create straw man scenarios, no matter how crazy, like Italian satellite interventions in elections, distrust is sown. And that can ultimately infect low involvement voters. In my view, messaging needs to be deployed by us to counteract distrust in elections. It won't go away by ballot measures or legislation alone. So again, think about the formal processes of legislation and ballot measures and things like that, and then the informal process of how we articulate them, that is messaging. And of course, messaging takes two forms. One is proactive and one is reactive. And sadly, I don't think we do either well. One is needed to explain our proposals for election fairness in simple yet compelling terms that continually stress universal fairness as the chief value we are seeking. Typically, Democratic messaging seems to me to be what I call submitting doctoral dissertations for public review. The second element of messaging is creating alternative definitions via counter messaging of what our opponents are actually doing by their legislation or ballot measures that destroy election fairness. We don't counter message very well either. So let's take a minute to look at our opposition's Secure MI Vote ballot initiative that Larry mentioned will go directly to the legislature. It won't go to us on the ballot, really. That, all the components of that scream mistrust elections because voter fraud is real. That's a very, very simple way to articulate that, and that's what they're messaging. That's what our opposition is messaging. So as you would expect, the Secure MI Vote provisions are loaded with provisions that ban clerks from using certain volunteer staff, ban volunteers from organizations like the League of Women Voters from helping clerks register voters, prohibits the use of freely donated polling places like churches, forces clerks to pay, as Larry mentioned, fair market value for all polling places, largely the churches, and therefore forces clerks to spend more money on elections if they can get it if they can actually get it from the legislature, from counties, cities, and townships. And it eliminates nonprofit grants to small jurisdiction clerks for many poorly funded election costs. All of the items above require us to what I call counter message, as simply as possible. The unfairness values being promoted in that ballot proposal by Republicans. And although I don't pretend to be good at devising clever messages, we might consider something like the following. For example, if clerks have to pay fair market value for usually free church hall, what about this? Pray in churches for free, vote in churches for a fee. That is otherwise known as the clerk's poll tax. Or Secure MI Vote banishes volunteers for life. Or spend more taxpayers' money to eliminate volunteers. Or Secure My Vote, that's that proposition, wants you to travel further and stand in longer lines as polling places. Election integrity, in my view, needs to be recaptured and redefined by us. It means both formal measures and compelling messaging. We don't win with just the formal measures. We must do both. And to end, I just wanted to mention something that I saw last week on TV. A host asked a University of Virginia law professor, an African-American woman, to explain critical race theory. She did it in 3 or 4 simple yet compelling sentences and ended with this. She said, critical race theory is about being the country that we say we are. And I sat there for a moment and said to myself, she just explained what fairness was in the simplest way I had ever heard. My second thought was, well, she can't be a Democrat. But then I immediately corrected myself by thinking that we don't listen enough to the core of our party when she speaks. Thanks for your time. Eli?
Thank you so much, Doug. A lot of food for thought here. So I'd like to open up the floor for questions. If you have a question, please just raise your hand and your name will spring at the top of the list. And while you're thinking about questions, I'll ask one. So I'd like to let's say hypothetically the Secure the Vote petition passes. I mean, it gets enough signatures and the Republican legislature immediately votes to override or to pass legislation, and the governor cannot override that vote. And so among the provisions that will kick in are restrictions on the use of absentee ballots. I will go through them all, but that's absentee ballots clearly, for the reasons several of the panelists discussed today, played a key role in 2020. And so I want to know, what is the implication of the passage of the Secure the Vote proposals, assuming that it does, for the November 2022 elections? When is it going to kick in? When would we stop being able to deliver absentee ballots to people, et cetera, et cetera? What is the timeline? Anyone?
Eli, I'm happy to answer that.
Okay.
It will not take effect until 2023. So it will not affect the 2022 elections. And I would also add that I expect we will be in court very quickly if and when that ever passes.
That's good to hear. I was wondering. Okay, let me ask if there are any other questions. Janet.
Yeah, and I have heard, but I'd like to confirm that if either one of the positive ballot proposals takes effect, that they would be ahead of the game for Secure My Vote. They would also be in effect in time to knock that out. Is that correct?
They would, if I may, Eli,
Sure.
Either of those proposals, both of them, whatever happens, if they get on the ballot and pass this fall, they will also be in effect starting in 2023. And, there will be a lot of sorting out to do in terms of what's in effect, what aspects of Secure My Vote violate those proposals. That'll all be sorted out by the courts well in advance, I think, of the 2024 election.
Agreed.
Catherine is asking, what is this loophole? How is it that the Secure My Vote doesn't have to go? Maybe we could just explain that one again.
Well, let me just say that in the Constitution, it lays out, initiative and referendum and so forth, and it provides that if voters initiate legislation, not a constitutional amendment, that does require a vote of the people always, but if legislation is proposed by a group of people, a petition drive, the legislature is given, I think it's 60 days to consider whether to just simply adopt it and avoid having it go to the ballot. And the And this has been for when the Republicans have controlled the legislature, this is something that they have done or tried to do repeatedly, where and under the Constitution, the legislation that comes in this route does not, the governor has no ability to veto it. But that's a provision of the Constitution which, in my opinion, and many people's opinion, ought to be changed. And one of the petition drives out there is simply and specifically to take out that provision.
Hmm.
Thank you. Actually, I've got a question from Carolyn. Is it Hakel? Hakel, sorry. If you would unmute yourself, you can ask a question.
Yeah, I liked hearing what, this is back to what Mark Brewer was talking about. I liked hearing him say that it would go into effect in 2023. But I keep casting my mind back to something I understand was happening back in 2018, which was a sort of shenanigans move that the Republicans in Lansing were pulling to take a voice vote to determine whether something they just voted would go into immediate effect. Immediate effect. They would have a voice vote. And even though everybody in the room knew they didn't have the 2/3 vote that is required in order to put something into an immediate effect, they would do it anyway, call it done, and move on. And it was enraging to me at the time that that was happening, but in order to feel positive that what Mark Brewer is saying is true, I would like to hear from anybody who knows if that was resolved in any way, if it does still go on, if it is or is not a potential ridiculous move on their part. That's my question. Thank you.
Carolyn, let me reassure you. It goes up in the state house all the time. It continues. In the Senate, in order to get immediate effect, it takes a roll call vote. And it takes a supermajority. And the Republicans cannot get that. So we Democrats in the legislature can block immediate effect now.
Okay, I didn't understand. Thank you so much. I didn't understand that. Great.
Yep.
Okay. KCR has a raised hand. Do you care to pose a question? Casey, I think let me see if I may have to unmute you just a second. You should be coming unmuted. I think you can talk, Casey.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay, good. All right, I'm asking, why haven't we been able to go online and see our votes with the new digital votes or the affiliating vote? Basically, for instance, like as a candidate, a couple of years ago I ran, and I wanted to count my votes. And I was told that I had to count them at the clerk's office and that I would have to pay. Now, economically challenged candidate cannot afford this, which leaves me out of the democracy process. Why aren't we able to count our own votes online?
Let me ask perhaps if Ed Golembiewski or Larry Kestenbaum want to field that one.
Well, let me just start by saying that the traditional, I mean, what's the law as it stands and has been for more than 100 years is the idea that a person's vote is completely private, and any way of for example, in Michigan law provides that if you're in the polling place and you show your ballot to someone before then your ballot is void. Because that was the way people would buy votes. They would want assurance that the voter they were buying the vote from had voted the right way. But the other problem is when you can have your employer or someone who is dominating you insist that you vote a certain way and make you prove that you voted that way. And so we, as a policy matter for many, many years, we don't want to give people access to their own votes, because if they did, then people we don't want to have access to their votes would get, be able to put pressure on them and get access. So the secret ballot is, I'm sorry, I'm seeing a comment here that's counting all the votes online. I'm not exactly sure what that would be. I guess I would need a clarification. Ed, do you have anything more?
Not really. Maybe just to Josephine's message in the chat. But Michigan, we now rely on, the promote the vote constitutional amendment in 2018 is enshrined paper ballots into the Michigan Constitution. Will continue to use paper ballots into perpetuity, and there is at this point no means to to vote online in the state of Michigan, and there probably won't be for some time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, what I'm saying is, why won't a person? Okay, they don't have to see everybody else vote. Why can't they confirm their own vote or who they voted for? Why can't they go online? And then why can't a candidate, okay, I know you don't want everybody in the world looking at the votes, be able to count the votes on their own line without having to go down there spending a large amount of money? And if they can't, why don't we fund that account, economically challenged candidate be able to have those fees waived?
Again, in terms of voting, on the voting online, again, right now, for now and for the foreseeable future, the internet is not a secure place to handle voting, and it's you can now go to the Michigan Voter Information Center and verify that your vote was received and counted, but it won't tell you how you voted. And so if you made a mistake on it, then that's on you. I mean, you don't have the ability to go. You certainly can't correct it, and you can't. But the thing is, if you could see it, then your employer or your abusive spouse or whatever, they could also see it if they wanted to. If they could force you to show it to them, and that's the thing that we want to avoid. But as far as I'm sorry, candidates getting their vote, all the votes are counted, regardless of what anybody has. I mean, I don't even know how to respond to that.
Well, I mean, maybe one way to look at this is, you're right. If you wanted to recount a race, there's going to be a deposit, a fee that's associated with that recount. That's true. It's currently set by statute, and it can be prohibitively expensive in some cases to recount a race. And maybe to your other point, outside of the recount avenue, obtaining copies of ballots or inspecting ballots themselves, and I think Larry touched on this while he was speaking, that is a possibility, although it may at this point come with having to submit a formal FOIA request, and again having to pay fees to be able to access that information, depending on how long it would take the municipality to produce the ballots or provide access to them if you wanted to come in person. That is reality. I suppose it could be addressed in both cases by by legislation.
Thank you. I'm going to
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, I see another question in the chat in regard to the legislature passing Secure My Vote. And it says, can legislators amend it prior to adoption? And the answer to that is no, but they could amend it later, because it basically has only the status of a bill that's passed by the legislature, and it could be unpassed by a future legislature, or even by the next day they could repeal it. And there was an attempt in the legislature when the marijuana legalization proposal came up, which was not a constitutional amendment, but a voter initiated legislation. And there were Republicans who strategically wanted to pass it so that they could later on, ditch it somehow, either by postponing the effective date or whatever. That by passing it themselves, that they would have the ability to make changes to it later on, and basically to nullify it. And there a majority in the Senate of the Republicans in the Senate were willing to do this, to pass the marijuana legalization proposal so that later on they could undo it. But the Republicans in the House, there were enough Republicans in the House who basically refused to vote for marijuana legalization even strategically. So it didn't happen. It went to the voters. It was passed as I expected it would, and now it would take, like, I think a 3/4 vote to override that. So So I see Dirk saying same session even. Yes, exactly.
Well, let me give Dirk the chance to ask a question. He's had his hand up for a little while. Dirk.
Thanks, Ellie. Mr. Brewer, thanks for all your hard work, diligent hard work. You're a little bit unusual in these meetings. I'm curious, of all these calls to action or outside calls to action, what would you recommend people look at and think about doing? If we've got time and we're fired up to take action, Mr. Brewer, what do you think the most important thing is?
I think there's several things. Help circulate promote the vote 2022 petition, get that on the ballot. And I want to echo what all the clerks and their excellent staff have said on this call. Please volunteer to be election inspectors, to get involved in the election administration process. We need Democrats in there. We need the ballots, the partisan ballots there. And that's a great thing. You don't have to work outdoors. You can volunteer. In some situations, there's pay available. That's a great way to get involved and help. Those would be my suggestions.
Actually, let me follow that up, Mark, and that is you're pretty tied into the Michigan Democratic Party. And so I'm wondering what are they doing to support the Promote the Vote petition? This is obviously absolutely critical.
Yeah, look, I'm not the chair of the party anymore, so that needs to be directed to the leadership. But I do believe everything in that proposal is something the Democratic Party supports. It's been in our platform for a long, long time. I know that the coalition is trying to do this as much as possible on a bipartisan basis. I mean, many of the groups supporting it are not partisan groups. That doesn't mean that we don't welcome the support of partisan groups. But again, you'll just have to talk to the state Democratic Party about their official position. But everything in there is something the Democrats have long supported.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Again, just please, those who have asked a question, if you could lower your hand, then I'll be able to tell who's got a new question and who's already asked their question. Any other questions for our panelists? Going once, going twice. Then the panel, I've got a panelist question. Let me see. Got nick of time. Okay, that's Janet.
Yeah, I did put it up and down, but it's hard to tell. I hear a lot of questions about the two similar proposals, and I just wanted to mention the one, as Larry was saying, it's so important to do the one that would knock out that loophole for the circulate and then pass into law. But that is like a second part of the My Right to Vote, which is somewhat competing with Promote the Vote. And I'm wondering if there's a way to if you prefer the one or the other, but you still want to support that provision. They've set it up as part one and part two.
No. Those are two proposals. Those are not the same thing. There's one proposal to knock out the loophole, and there's one proposal for election reform that's similar to the Promote the Vote proposal. So there's no conflict.
Okay, so they would be, you would be signing for one or for the other and not for both?
No, you could, in terms of signing, you could sign all three. You could sign
Yeah.
everything. You could sign
Yeah.
nothing. No, what I'm saying is that the people who are circulating the close the loophole petition, that's one petition, and then they turn the page and say, now you want to sign a election reform petition. Those
Okay,
are two separate petitions requiring separate signatures submitted separately. They're not tied together except organizationally.
perfect. Thank you.
In response to a question in the chat, my understanding is, so the MI right to vote has two petitions. And I don't know how they're going to label them, but there's petition number
Yeah.
1, and there's the petition number 2 will be directed at the process by which the governor's veto is nullified, basically.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
I think they would probably call that one number 1, but okay, whatever.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think that's number
I-
one.
All right.
Yeah.
Um,
But I think it's critically important, not just in terms of election reform, but in terms of every issue, minimum wage, all the kinds of shenanigans the Republicans have pulled for years using this provision. Let's finally, and for once and for all, get rid of it.
All right. Unless Dirk has another question, I can't tell if that hand is still raised. No, it's not. Then I am going to call the panel to an end. I want to thank all the panelists for taking the time to participate in this discussion. As you know, this meeting is being recorded. It will be linked on the Washtenaw Democratic Party's website, and I hope we'll get even more participation, kind of viewers from that.